Hello and welcome to the Valley. Today I am your host, Janet Michael. We are on the Zooms with Ken Slack today. He is communications specialist for the Stanton district of VDOT. Ken and I are actually still on the Zooms from the show that you heard on Thursday. We're recording on Tuesday afternoon, and part one was a snow show on Thursday. Part two is the actual VDOT show where we get an update on road projects and all of the construction and things like that that are happening on our highway. So Ken, again, I do appreciate that you were willing, not having any idea that I was about to drop two radio shows on you, that you're still here and still willing to continue talking to me.
I'm having to pace myself for this marathon session, but hopefully we'll share something that folks will find valuable out of this.
One of the projects we're going to talk about is the 81 corridor there at Strasburg. And you and I have joked about this in the past that I probably would never see it because I don't drive on 81. But I do want you to know I make an attempt every time I go into Strasburg on Route 11 to look down and over to see what it looks like so far. So I have been able to see some of the construction, even if I'm not driving through it myself.
As long as you're taking only brief glances in either direction, yes, you can see plenty of activity along that stretch of 81 in the Strasburg area, but keep your eyes on the road, Janet.
And it's going to be a huge improvement once it's done. Now, it's not going to be done for a while yet, but you're really going to make it so much easier to get through that intersection and continue down 81 through Strasburg.
Yeah, and that is one of the most challenging portions of 81, the entire corridor from the West Virginia line down to the Tennessee line, because that's one of the few places where we have a left-hand exit. If you're going south on 81, anybody who's driven through there knows this is a challenging spot. You have traffic that's coming in from the left side, which is a little bit different than what we're used to seeing. Plus, it's the junction of two major interstates. So that section from exit 300 down to 296, right there through the Strasburg area, is the reason why we're doing this project. Way back in 2018, when we did the study and had the public input sessions, this area was certainly targeted as one of the spots that needed improvements first. And we're getting to it now. So we've got about a year of construction under our belt out there and about 2.5 years left.
I want to talk about the study for a second because you guys don't just say, okay, the 3,244th person has now complained, or there's been 612 accidents. So now we have to do something with that road. You guys do studies and you look to see what improvements can be made and what's going to be the most effective. And is it necessary or required? You don't just suddenly randomly decide, oh, this is what we're going to work on next.
Yeah, that's right. And the 2018 study, and VDOT spent the better part of that year doing this Interstate 81 corridor improvement program study. We had traffic data of all kinds, looking at crash rates, the crash severity, the amount of backups, person hours of delay, and there's traffic terms, but VDOT nerdisms, I guess you could call them, but all kinds of raw data that really point to where the hotspots are along the 81 corridor. Plus, we went out several times in the spring, summer, and again in the fall to share with folks, look, on these maps, we have targeted these areas for potential needs of improvements. But we wanted to hear from folks about what their experiences were. Do you agree with this? Do you not agree with this? Is there something we forgot? The folks that drive the corridor every day, whether they're long haulers or whether they use a portion of the interstate as part of their daily commute, we wanted to hear from folks. So that's really what led to the current I-81 Corridor Improvement Program, which we mercifully call Improve 81 for short. That pointed to our first 65 projects. Some of them were relatively small projects where we were extending some of the acceleration ramps and things like that to improve safety around interchanges, to putting in more cameras and more message boards to let folks help them make better decisions about their travel, to some of the more major projects that you're seeing now, like the southbound widening at Strasburg. Coming up next, we're about ready to start the widening in both directions in the Harrisonburg area, and it won't be too much further down the road that we'll be starting a widening in Winchester as well. Plus, in the middle of all this, we did another study in 2025 that has led to some more recommendations for new projects in the future. Those haven't been funded yet, but we do have some priorities. In other words, there's something else in the hopper. We're not just going to finish what we identified as the needs and then twiddle our thumbs. We'll be moving on to the next round of projects that are coming up and have been identified as what we need to do next.
And it's important to note that these projects aren't one and done because then there's ongoing maintenance. we just had the conversation that people heard last week about how maintenance is a huge painting a bridge. I was asking you about the San Francisco Bay Bridge being painted. That's not to make it look pretty. You're trying to keep these bridges safe. So you're going to have to go back and make sure that you're maintaining them for the long haul as well.
And widening on 81 is a good example of that because one of the challenges of many parts of this interstate is that the shoulders aren't as wide as the modern standards call for. When we go from 2 lanes to three, a lot of times it's going from two travel lanes plus a decent right shoulder and a very narrow shoulder on the left to 3 lanes plus full shoulders on both sides. And it's almost going to feel like we've doubled the amount of asphalt out there. But that also means that the crews that are out there maintaining the roadway, including snow removal, they have more roadway to clear out. We've got more travel lanes plus clearing those shoulders as well.
Where is that project right now?
The Strasburg widening,
Yes.
we're about 25 to 30% of the way complete with it. A big part of that is bridge work. We are replacing the southbound bridge over Cedar Creek right there at the Warren Shenandoah County line. And we're widening the southbound bridge over the CSX Railway, which is probably about a mile further south. And bridge work a lot of times dictates just how long it takes to do a project. We also have it's about 4 miles worth of widening work to do. Some of the initial base layers of new asphalt have been put down, but sometimes when people see that, well, we're going to be driving on that pretty soon. That's for now, not yet. But it does actually help the construction vehicles as they're going back and forth through the work zone. They're not going over muddy hills, they're going over base layer asphalt. There will be much more paving to do in the future, but it does take quite a bit of time to replace a bridge or widen a bridge that happens to be under traffic 24/7. We could certainly build bridges a lot quicker if we could just close them. Contractor comes in, builds a new bridge, and we reopen it. But somehow I think we would cause riots if we did that on Interstate 81. You've got to find ways that you can keep traffic 2 lanes each way on the interstate during the peak hours, which is most of the daytime, but only during those nighttime and overnight hours can you even have the single lane closures. So it gets tricky to schedule these things. And our contractors want to get in and out as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. There's a lot of coordination to try to keep things moving during construction.
And then how does weather impact? Like that project is going to be a multi-year project. So you're going to have a couple of winters where you're having to work. Again, we're recording on Tuesday afternoon. I think it's 28 degrees outside right now, and it's not supposed to even get above freezing. That has an impact, I would imagine, on what you can and can't do.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you get a snowstorm that really shuts things down for a week if it's big enough, or a tropical storm that comes through. But I will say that when VDOT works its contract documents together, we kind of look at history and how many days in the winter are workable and things like that. There's sometimes negotiation during and right at the end of a contract where the contractor tries to document, hey, there's a reason we couldn't work on these days because of X, Y, or Z. But over the years and decades, VDOT and our partners in the contracting industry have gotten pretty good at knowing just how many work days you can get out of the 365-day calendar.
And you sometimes build in incentives. I remember when we were talking about Rockland Road, they finished that project even earlier than you had hoped that they would finish it. And by meeting some of those deadlines, there are incentives for getting that done sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the project, and a lot of times it depends on the traffic impact. When there is a closure, like we had with Rockland Road bridge construction, we had to close that road for about a year and a half or so. Those are the kinds of contracts, and of course, pretty much anything on the interstate as well is going to have an incentive built in for the contractor as well as disincentives, in other words, penalties for finishing late. Rockland Road is one of those examples where the contractor, things went really well for them. Weather helped a lot. Last winter was pretty mild and they were able to do quite a bit of work, even in January and February. Sometimes that's not always going to be the case, but they got the maximum incentive on that. And we do not mind writing those kind of checks because it's good for the entire community when a project like that finishes ahead of schedule.
Let's take a break. When we come back, can we talk about some of the South Street improvements that you're doing in Front Royal? Can we do that in the next segment?
We sure can.
We are on the Zooms today with Ken Slack. He is communication specialist for the Stanton District of VDOT. We are getting an update on several road projects. We're going to do more of that when we come back in just a couple of minutes.
This Tuesday, April Davis will change the world. She doesn't know that yet. All she knows is that she went to justserve.org and volunteered an hour of her time. Browsing through dozens of service opportunities in her community, April decided to spend her Tuesday evening serving dinner to mothers and their children at a transitional house. She doesn't know she'll be serving a particular mother and daughter who will be spending their first night in this home. April doesn't know that the hot meal she'll serve is the first this mother and daughter will have had in a week, or that the simple smile she'll offer as she serves them will help them realize that things are going to be all right. Which is why this Tuesday, April Davis will change the world. See the difference you can make. Sign up for service opportunities in your community. Visit justserve.org.
Welcome back to the Valley. Today, I am your host, Janet Michael. It is VDOT Day, so we are on the Zooms with Ken Slack. He is communications specialist for the Stanton District of VDOT, getting an update on some of the road projects. We talked earlier about the 81 widening there at Strasburg. And Ken, you guys have multiple projects that are going on in multiple stages of actual work, as well as planning, as well as studies, as well as wrapping up all across the state. But you've got a lot of them right here in the Shenandoah Valley, too. The South Street Improvement Project is a good example. That's something else that you guys are working on.
Yeah, absolutely. We're relatively early in the design phase of that. And in fact, we recently, I think it was on the 14th of January, we had a public hearing where we presented the initial plans and got some feedback for them. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, it's South Street in the town of Front Royal, in the area where there's the Rural King store. There's a McDonald's, a Burger King, a Martin's grocery store, all in that area. We've been working with the town of Front Royal and to try to make some improvements along there to try to help improve traffic flow. Sometimes folks that are coming off of 340 Commerce Avenue, they're taking the right to go on to South Street and then immediately needing to take a left to go in toward the shopping center. There's not a lot of space there. And so sometimes traffic backs up toward the main intersection there at 340. So we're looking at some possible solutions, how we can improve that. Do we move them down to the next intersection? Are there ways that we can change things up there and try to improve safety and reduce congestion? Sometimes we go to a public hearing with plans that have had a lot of traffic study and they look good on paper. And then somebody looks at it and says, what about this or what about that? And that's why we take them to the public. We had our meeting at the library there on Kreiser and had a pretty good turnout. A few dozen folks came out. Folks liked some portions of the plan, didn't care for other portions of the plan, but that's normal. And that's why we take these projects to the public before we're finished with all the design work, so that if there are some changes needed, we can try to incorporate those and make a project that's helpful and efficient and cost effective at the same time.
And that's another one of those situations where it's not just South Street proper. It's because people are trying to get into Royal Plaza Shopping Center. So you've got to work with, I would imagine, the property owner at Royal Plaza in case an entrance needs to be moved or something needs to happen on their property too. You've got to make sure they're included in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times the folks that come out to our public meetings are indeed the property owners, whether it's businesses or homes that are along that kind of a stretch of roadway. Let's face it, if I own a business along South Street, I have a vested interest in knowing how are people going to get in and out of our parking lot. Are they going to have to go down another block, make a U-turn and get to us? That certainly affects me. And sometimes as we go through the right-of-way process, we might need some temporary construction easements. And we were fully aware of it, that the changes that we might make on a roadway certainly affect the people that live or work or are trying to make a living on that same road.
It is a little sketchy, I will say, as someone who comes down Commerce, makes the right, and then turns left, particularly when the station is doing Camping for Hunger. That's where the bus is parked. So coming in and trying to make that left into the parking lot to get to the bus, and you're waiting for the oncoming traffic to get out of the way. But maybe there's a ton of cars that are going to make a left on the Commerce and they're in that left-hand turn lane and you can't get around them. So yeah, it definitely deserves to be looked at. I will say that.
And again, that's part of the reason the way we go to the public with these projects, because when we do our traffic studies, perhaps We might have somebody who's out there on a Tuesday and again on a Friday, and maybe there's something that happens on Wednesday that nobody told us about that might play a role in what we need to design out there. It's not unusual for us to tweak our plans based on public input, and there have been some times over the years when we've had some significant changes to plans because town or county or city says, let's try something different out here.
All of these projects, for the most part, no matter what stage they're in, you put them on your website. You've got a really, I'm very impressed with the VDOT website in your project stuff. You'll have all the projects and you'll say, this is where they are. And if there's a public hearing, this is where it is, or here's where you can give feedback, or this is what the cost is projected to be. Here are the timelines for what stages are going to be done for what when. You do a really good job, I think, of keeping the public updated, but we also can go and look at that and say, wait, I didn't even know this was happening. Let me go find out some more information about it.
We do. We spend a lot of time keeping those project pages up to date. That's our sort of internal term for them, the project pages. And we have a few dozen of them that we're maintaining at any one time. Some of them are at the very early stages of design when we're first getting ready to go to a public hearing or advertise it to the public to, hey, take a look at these plans and see what you think. Others that are well into the design and we're getting ready to go to construction. We also, while a project is being built, we'll update it with traffic updates if there's some impact due to the cones and barrels that are out there, and put some photos up to show folks the progress and that sort of thing. So we do our best to make these pages helpful to the public. And all you really have to do is internet search for VDOT projects, and that takes you pretty much right to that page. Click on Stanton District. You can see a little map showing what part of the state we cover. So Stanton District may not necessarily make you think of Warren County or Frederick County, but it'll show you right there which counties we cover. And take a look at peruse those pages, because you can probably find some things that surprise you.
I did that recently. I was telling you during the break, I did that recently because rarely am I coming out of Winchester past the mall. I guess that's Millwood, and coming up the hill to turn right to go on 522 to go to Costco or whatever. I normally don't go that way because now there's Crossover Boulevard and there is no reason for me to be in that mess of traffic there. But I think Tim and I were going to Big Lots or something. We've been somewhere else. And as I'm coming up, I'm like, wait, I thought they were going to do something to this bridge. So I pull out my phone and I go to the website and I do a little search, and it tells me what your plans are with that bridge, when the potential start time is, all of that kind of stuff. It's great information to have just to prepare, because I'm thinking, oh, wow, if they have to take this down to one lane, I'm definitely not coming this way when that construction is going on.
If we took that road down to one lane, I think we would all have to be running away from the pitchforks and
We'd all want to
torches.
jump off the bridge. We'd all just get out of our cars and jump off of the bridge.
That's a huge project and a much needed one. That section of roadway you're talking about, basically from that intersection where you go to the Apple Blossom Mall and then going toward 81, where the road kind of curves around to the right, and then obviously the bridge over the interstate, and then meeting up at that intersection with 522. That's actually two different projects. Initially, it was a city project in the city limits of Winchester, and then the bridge replacement and some work around that intersection with 522 was a VDOT project. Now it's all ours. A few years ago, we had a lot of collaboration with the city and agreed to take them both on because there's so much crossover between those two projects, and they really needed to be done together, coordinated, to make sure that there wasn't conflict between the work zones and that sort of thing. So you mentioned that bridge. That's a 7-lane wide bridge over Interstate 81. The new bridge is going to be 9 lanes wide. It's going to be enormous. But the project plans call for the new bridge to be built slightly to the north. So there will be a little bit of a roadway realignment as part of this project. But by doing it this way, we don't have to narrow it down to a lane in each direction and things like that. There will still be some impacts during construction for a few years out there, but we're going to keep as many lanes of vehicles going as possible.
That's an old bridge. Let's just talk for a second about how old that bridge is. It's been there for as long as I can remember. So it's been there at least 50 years.
Well, and that's a good point. That's one of our challenges with the Interstate 81 is that the vast majority of that interstate was built in a relatively narrow window from like late 50s through the 60s. And so you have quite a few bridges either going over the interstate or on the main line carrying the interstate lanes that are 50, 60, 70 years old. We have a vigorous bridge maintenance program. So we get a lot of life out of these structures, but every bridge bridge does have a lifespan and at some point needs to be widened. So part of the program for 81 improvements is looking at bridges. Does this need to be replaced fully, or can we widen it and get a couple more decades out of it if we replace, say, the superstructure, meaning the deck and the railings and all that kind of stuff, the stuff up top? So it's every single one of these is looked at individually. And that's why some projects, Strasburg's a good example. We talked about that earlier, replacing the bridge over Cedar Creek. We're able to widen the one over CSX. We're not just going in there and just rubber stamp, replace, replace, replace. If it makes sense and it's feasible to do a widening and a rehab of a bridge instead of fully replacing it, we'll do that.
You're going to give me a heads up if you ever have to replace the bridge over 81 here at Middletown on Reliance, right? So that I can find a different way to Front Royal. It's a fairly new bridge. Although I will say, I was joking with you earlier how I do screenshots of things that I see on social media so that I can talk to Gaz about them for our show every month. A couple of weeks ago, I was on my way into Front Royal. I think I was going to meet Nikki at the chamber, and there was a giant hole right at the end of that bridge when it meets back to the asphalt as you're coming on the off ramp. I was heading into Front Royal. It was the off ramp of 81. And I, for a split second, thought I could almost see the road beneath me from this giant pothole that was in. And I thought, I got to tell Ken that he needs to get this thing fixed. I also have to remember that you're not the guy that I should call.
Well, and that's a good call to the VDOT Customer Service Center. I'll put in a plug for them because I think a lot of folks may have misconceptions about, oh, calling the customer service center, I'm going to be on hold forever, or I'm going to be talking to AI or something like that. These are real people that are answering the phones 24/7 and generally answering within a few seconds. And when we get a request, whether it's fix a pothole or, hey, there's a sight distance issue at this intersection or whatever the case may be, that generates a work order for the appropriate group that would handle that. So it doesn't just go on a shelf somewhere. It requires action. Now, sometimes that means somebody goes out, looks at something and says, this is actually not a problem, or here's why we can't do this. But no matter what, it requires action, and we will follow up on it for sure.
And that makes sense. When I come out to the end of our street to leave, there's a house on the corner that has these ginormous pine trees that you almost have to pull out into the intersection to be able to look left to see if there are any cars coming. That's not a VDOT problem. That's not something I can call you about necessarily, right?
There are times when literally we'll make contact with property owners and say, hey, something is impeding sight distance, or it's extending into the VDOT right of way, or is a potential hazard because it's over the roadway. We'll talk to folks. Sometimes it's a phone call or knocking on somebody's door and saying, hey, come take a look at this. Is there a solution here? Because we want everybody to be safe. So it's a lot easier to handle those things face to face, talking with folks. And we can work something out.
Well, I appreciate you working it out with me today to record 2 shows back to back. And as we're sitting here on Tuesday, we still don't know if we got any snow the weekend. So people are listening on Monday and we're still in the dark about whether or not anything actually happened.
I'm looking out and I see bare ground. So hopefully that's still the case when this airs on Monday.
We'll keep our fingers crossed and hope that that's what we see on Monday too.
I'm not going to hold my breath for that, though.
Thank you for taking the time today. I do appreciate it, my friend.
Absolutely. Always glad to help.
I will be back tomorrow with a brand new episode of The Valley Today, a few minutes after noon. So meet me here then.